The NFL and fantasy football is always changing on a week-to-week basis. There's always lessons that we can learn that can help us going forward. These are 10 lessons I learned in week 12 that I think can help you in week 13. And the first lesson is Saquon Barkley. That's it, Saquon Barkley. You know, every so often we get a transcendent running back year where the question at the end of the year is basically, did you have that running back? And if so, you probably won a fantasy football championship. Look at guys like LaDainian Tomlinson in 2006, Christian McCaffrey 2019, Priest Holmes 2003, Marshall Faulk 2000, David Johnson 2016, just to name a few. It looks like Saquon Barkley may be joining this list this year, currently on pace to run for the most yards ever in the history of the NFL. Also on pace to go over 2,500 scrimmage yards, also on pace to go over 20 touchdowns. It looks like Saquon Barkley is going to have one of those transcendent, legendary running back seasons where we look back on the 2024 fantasy football year, and really the only question we need to ask is, did you draft Saquon Barkley or not? And did we learn a lesson about benching Jaylen Waddle? I don't know. I mean, this is going to be a tough one. I said, if you watched our live streams, and look, I said pretty much everywhere, bench Jaylen Waddle this week. Obviously, that was a mistake. But if you watched our live streams, I said over and over, look, he's too good of a player. He's going to have a big game at some point because any player as talented as Jaylen Waddle, who's on the field as often as Jaylen Waddle, is going to have a big game. It happened to be this week. Now, the trick here is not getting trapped into this. We got to look a little bit deeper. Was this actually a sign of things that could be happening or just a sign of a circumstance? I think it was more a sign of the circumstance. He still only had a 19 first read percentage, which is extremely low. He still was behind Jonnu Smith in terms of targets. He was still only the second option here. And the Patriots double-teamed Tyreek Hill and just pretty much took him out of this game plan, which allowed Jaylen Waddle to beat them. On the one hand, we don't want to overreact to this one big game after Jaylen Waddle had done nothing all season, but on the other hand, we don't want to completely ignore it either. So I think maybe this week you can have a little bit of confidence in Jaylen Waddle, but don't go overboard here thinking Jaylen Waddle is back, this is it, we're getting the guy we drafted. We need to see more than one game from Jaylen Waddle before we can get to that point. And I'm not ready to proclaim that Jackson Smith-Njigba is now the wide receiver one in Seattle, even though it kind of looks that way from fantasy production. If you look at the last two games, DK Metcalf and JSN have the exact same first read percentage, although JSN does have more targets than DK Metcalf. This is looking like a true 1A, 1B. Now here's where I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit on Jackson Smith-Njigba. I know he's been great. I know he's had 3 straight really big games. I know it's hard to keep him out of your lineup, and I'm not saying to bench JSN by any stretch. But his ADOT, his average depth of target in week 12, was an absurdly low 1.9. 66 of his 77 yards came after the catch. That is a lot to ask for any player. We're talking about 90% of his yards were after the catch. And if you look at the last 2 games with DK Metcalf, his average depth of target is also an absurdly low 5.9. He's still the same guy getting these little chintzy short throws. He's just making the most of them right now. Now, could he do this the rest of the season? Absolutely. Anybody can get hot and do this over a short period of time. But I still think DK Metcalf is the guy you want in this offense more often than not. Although I will say Jackson Smith-Njigba at least has to be considered a solid start going forward the rest of the way, just based on his usage. And I'll also say, if you're liking the video, getting value out of it, do me a quick favor, hit the like button, subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. Now, coming out of the team's Week 11 bye, we heard OC Liam Cohen saying he wanted to get Sean Tucker more involved in this Tampa Bay backfield, and we got a good glimpse of how I think they want to use each of these guys. Bucky Irving played 54% of the snaps, Rachaad White played 46% of the snaps, and Sean Tucker played a measly 8%. Now, the positive for Sean Tucker here was it looked like he was the goal line back, like Bucky Irving taking him down to the 1, and then Sean Tucker comes in and punches in the touchdown. Now, that changed a little bit after Sean Tucker fumbled. We'll have to see how this plays out going forward. But what was really encouraging here for people who have Bucky Irving in fantasy, but maybe not so much for people who have Rachaad White, is Bucky Irving ran 56% of the routes. That was a huge increase for Bucky Irving coming out of the bye, and he had 6 targets to Rachaad White's 1. If he is going to be the pass catching back here, this is going to give him a tremendous ceiling. Him and Rachaad White did split carries, but that pass catching role is so valuable in this offense and in fantasy. So Bucky Irving looks to me like the running back you want in this backfield. He's got the highest ceiling. He's got the most upside. Rachaad White, probably just a flex play at this point, a touchdown dependent flex. Sean Tucker, nothing more than a goal line vulture, although that remains to be seen if it's still the case after he fumbled at the goal line in week 12. Speaking of backfield splits, is Tracy losing his stronghold on this Giants backfield? Sure, he was still the guy for most of the game in week 12. In the first half and the first drive of the third quarter, he played almost 50% of the snaps and he got all but one carry. But then he did something that has been a trouble for him this year. He fumbled at the end of that drive. After that, we saw not only Devin Singletary, but also Eric Gray pretty much rotate snaps. They all played double-digit snaps the rest of the game, all played about 30 to 35% of the snaps. Remember, this was an issue for him the game before the bye when he fumbled in overtime to cost the Giants the win. For as good as Tracy has looked, you gotta wonder, is he starting to get in Daboll's doghouse here? I'm not ready to outright say like Tracy is no longer the guy in New York, but I'm certainly nervous enough to bump him down to just a flex because I think we could start to see more Devin Singletary and even more Eric Gray going forward, and if Tracy continues to fumble, he might actually get benched. And then it sounds likely that Josh Downs is not going to play this week, but I want to talk about this Indianapolis Colts wide receiver room because I think a lot of people have this conception that Josh Downs is the wide receiver one here. He's the guy you want, and Pittman is just kind of the afterthought. But if you look at the two games with Anthony Richardson, it's actually the opposite. In the two games with Anthony Richardson, Pittman has the higher first read percentage, and he also has more targets. Now, I know a couple weeks ago, Josh Downs had the bigger game because of the touchdown, but this week, Pittman definitely had the bigger game. He's getting more of the first read looks. He's getting more of the targets. And now we might be looking at a Michael Pittman without Josh Downs, which means he would once again become at least a solid start this week. But I do think going forward, because it doesn't sound like this is a season-ending injury or anything like that for Josh Downs, Pittman is going to be the wide receiver you're going to want in this Indianapolis Colts wide receiver room. Now, that being said, I don't think either of these guys have tremendous upside with Anthony Richardson. I would say Pittman, nothing more than a flex to solid start depending on matchup. Josh Downs, probably more of a flex start. And don't forget, you got to get your fantasy lineup set by Thursday because we got 3 games this Thursday for that Thanksgiving feast. And don't forget to also take advantage of the Underdog Feast, the new customer special. Jordan Love just needs to get half a yard on Thanksgiving. He gets that. You win that pick right away. Just make sure when you join Underdog for the first time, you use promo code ENDGAME because not only will that get you that free Jordan Love pick, but also up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Do we have to start considering Jonnu Smith a no-doubt must-start tight end? Over the last 2 games, he actually is the leading receiver for the Miami Dolphins. He leads the team in targets, yards, touchdowns, and even first read percentage. I don't know why they've decided to run this passing game through Jonnu Smith, but hey, it's working. The Dolphins are winning. I guess I can't argue with it. I'm not ready to say Jonnu Smith is an outright, no doubt, must-start tight end. But I think if you got Jonnu Smith, you cannot bench Jonnu Smith. He has to be in your fantasy lineup for the most part. Unless you have like Trey McBride or Brock Bowers or just one of those absolute studs, you got to roll with Jonnu Smith. And I'm not really sure what Chiefs wide receiver you have to roll with. It's been interesting here the last couple of games. It's looking like Xavier Worthy might actually be the wide receiver one in KC, with D-Hop more of like a change of pace wide receiver. I don't really know how to describe it. But if you look at the last 2 games, Xavier Worthy's run 69% of the routes. DeAndre Hopkins only run 45% of the routes. He also has one more target than D-Hop. Now, I know D-Hop had the bigger game here because he scored the touchdown, but it's kind of looking like maybe Xavier Worthy's the guy you want. I think we can start considering Xavier Worthy at least a flex option because now with his involvement, he at least gives you somewhat of a floor with that ceiling. And I think I'm probably just going to say the same thing about D-Hop. I think he's only a flex star. We just haven't seen D-Hop be utilized the way we wanted him to be utilized to give him that tremendous league-winning type upside, but he's still a flex with upside. And what's going on with Jonathan Taylor and Kyren Williams? These 2 running backs were supposed to carry our fantasy teams this year, and the last 4 weeks, they've been pretty much terrible. Over that stretch, Kyren Williams is the running back 30 in PPR formats, and Jonathan Taylor is the running back 35. Now, on the plus side, they're still both the absolute workhorse running backs for their backfields. Jonathan Taylor has played 85% of the snaps over that stretch. Kyren Williams has played an absurd 91% of the snaps over that stretch, but the production just isn't there. When you look at Kyren Williams, it's not really hard to see what's going on here. First of all, the lack of touchdowns. Only 1 touchdown over the last 4 games after scoring, I think, in like 18 straight games. But also the pass catching is gone. In those 4 games with Puka and Kupp now healthy, he only has a 5% target share. The pass catching has completely dried up for Kyren Williams. Now, Jonathan Taylor, never a guy we relied on for the pass catching, but he also is not scoring touchdowns, has not scored a touchdown over the last 4 games. But I feel like both of these guys are due for some positive regression at some point. Kyren Williams has had 4 carries inside the 5-yard line over the last 4 weeks. He's only scored 1 touchdown. Jonathan Taylor has 3 carries inside the 5-yard line. hasn't scored any touchdowns yet. I would still have a very hard time benching either of these guys. I still think they're weekly strong starts, but maybe they're just not going to deliver on the promise of a second round, first round pick like we thought. And then finally, we got to talk about the Broncos passing game. Look, the Broncos cannot run the ball. Like, it doesn't matter who it is. Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, Javonte, they just can't run the ball. But they are great at throwing the football. We've seen now for multiple weeks, Bo Nix has been very good. Courtland Sutton looking like a stud. Even rookie Devon Villay kind of coming up to be a flex start in fantasy. I think I'm finally going to bump Courtland Sutton up to a strong start this week. I almost don't even care about the matchup. He's come through in tough matchups. He's always got touchdown upside. I almost think Courtland Sutton is a set and forget wide receiver for fantasy rest of the season. Villay, like I said, more like a flex type, especially in PPR leagues. Doesn't have a lot of upside in your non-PPR leagues, but definitely a flex in PPR. And I think Bo Nix at this point is almost a set and forget QB, even in 1 QB leagues. No, he doesn't have the upside of like the Jalen Hurtses, the Josh Allens, the Lamar Jacksons. But look, if you didn't draft one of those guys, you could do worse than Bo Nix. And no matter who you drafted or what team you have, we can help you get into the playoffs and hopefully take home that championship. Make sure you check out our Week 13 playlist right here.